The sun was sinking low over the dry plains, stretching its long golden fingers across the land. Dust hung in the air, soft and glowing, while the sound of cicadas filled the silence that followed the day's last breath. A wooden farmhouse stood alone on the edge of the prairie, its roof sagging a little, its porch creaking with every passing breeze. Inside, the faint clatter of dishes and the smell of stew lingered from supper. Everything looked still, almost peaceful. But that kind of quiet never lasted long out here. A faint rustle came from beyond the barn. It was quick, sharp, the kind of sound that made your heart jump before your mind caught up. She stopped mid-step, her hand still holding the edge of the dish towel. The wind was calm, too calm, and that noise hadn't been the wind. She turned toward the open door, eyes narrowing at the fading light. Out there, shadows stretched long across the dry field, and something moved between them. Her brother had already noticed. He stepped out onto the porch with his rifle in hand, his boots landing hard on the old wood. "Stay inside," he said, his voice firm but steady. She shook her head, stepping forward anyway, drawn by that strange feeling that something wasn't right. The barn door shifted again, the faint creak of a hinge breaking the silence. The dog barked once from under the porch, low and uncertain. Before falling quiet, the brother raised his gun slightly, peering into the twilight. "Probably just a coyote," he muttered. But even as he said it, his jaw tightened. Coyotes didn't move like that. Not that slow, not that careful. There was a strange hesitation in the movement beyond the barn, like something watching them. Waiting. She came to stand beside him despite his warning. Her voice was low, almost trembling. "What if it's hurt?" she asked. "You can't just shoot at every sound." He didn't answer right away. His eyes stayed fixed on the dark space between the barn and the trees. The last light of the day caught the edge of his face, showing the small scar under his eye, the one he'd gotten years back when he tried to break a wild colt. He was older now, harder, carrying the kind of caution that came from losing too much already. The wind carried another sound this time, a faint whimper. It was soft, broken, almost human. She froze, her hand tightening on his arm. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. He nodded once. "Yeah, I heard." He stepped down from the porch, boots crunching on the dry earth. She followed despite the fear pressing at her chest. The whimper came again, closer now, from the shadow beside the barn. The brother lifted his rifle, steadying his aim. She could barely breathe. "Wait," she said softly. "Let's see what it is first." But he didn't lower the gun. His eyes stayed sharp, his stance ready. Then, from behind the barn, something stumbled into view. It looked like an animal at first, small and thin, covered in dirt. But when it lifted its head, the light caught its eyes, and they weren't the eyes of any wild creature. They were frightened, pleading, human. She gasped and stepped forward before she even thought. "Stop!" she cried out. "He's not a dog," she begged through tears as her brother raised the gun. The boy in the dirt looked no older than 10. His face smeared with mud and streaked with blood. His clothes were torn, his feet bare, and he looked half-starved. The brother hesitated, lowering the gun a few inches, confusion flickering in his eyes. "What in the world? ... he muttered, stepping closer. But the boy flinched, scrambling back like a scared animal. "Don't hurt me," he said, his voice cracking, so small it almost broke her heart. She knelt down, her hands raised gently. "It's all right," she whispered. "No one's going to hurt you." The boy looked between them, his eyes darting toward the rifle. "He was going to shoot me," he said. Her brother sighed and finally lowered the gun, still uneasy. "We didn't know what you were," he said. "It's dangerous out here. You shouldn't be sneaking around people's barns at night." The boy didn't answer. He just looked toward the trees behind the barn, his body trembling. She followed his gaze, and that's when she noticed the faint movement in the darkness beyond the fence. Someone else was out there. The brother saw it too. He lifted the rifle again, his jaw tight. "We're not alone," he said. The boy's eyes widened. "Please," he whispered, "don't let them find me." The air grew heavy. Even the cicadas seemed to stop their song. She turned back to the boy. "Who's out there?" she asked softly. He shook his head, tears filling his eyes. "They'll kill me if they see me here." Her brother's voice dropped low. "Who will?" Before the boy could answer, the sound of hooves echoed from the distance. Slow at first, then faster, drawing closer with every second. The brother moved quickly, pulling the boy toward the porch. "Inside now?" he ordered. They rushed into the house, slamming the door behind them. The sound of horses grew louder, mixed with shouts. She pressed her back to the wall, heart racing, while her brother peeked through the curtain. Dust clouds rose in the dim light as several riders approached, silhouettes sharp against the horizon. They weren't travelers. The way they rode fast, reckless, with rifles slung over their shoulders, told a different story. The brother's face darkened. "Looks like trouble," he said quietly. The boy hid behind the table, clutching the edge as if it could protect him. She knelt beside him again. "Who are they?" she whispered. He looked up at her, his voice breaking. "They took me from my home," he said. "I ran away. They want me dead." The brother turned sharply. "What are you talking about? Who are these men?" But the boy only shook his head. "They're not men you can fight." Outside, the riders slowed, their horses snorting and pawing at the ground. One of them dismounted, his boots hitting the dirt hard. He called out, his voice deep and rough. "We're looking for a runaway. You seen a boy come through here?" Her brother didn't answer. He stood still, staring through the window, his finger resting near the trigger. She could see the struggle in his eyes, the choice. Between lying to protect a stranger or risking everything they had. The man outside spoke again, louder this time. "We know he came this way. Best not to hide him, or you'll regret it." The boy trembled, tears streaking his dirty face. "Please," he whispered. "Don't tell them." She looked at her brother, silently pleading. He clenched his jaw, saying nothing. The silence stretched, heavy and tense. Then the sound of boots on the porch broke it. Someone was coming up the steps. The brother motioned for her to stay quiet and moved toward the door. The knocking came hard and sharp. "Open up," the voice commanded. She felt her stomach twist. The boy pressed his face into his hands, shaking. When the brother finally opened the door, the man standing there looked mean sunburned skin, scar across his neck and eyes that had seen too much killing. His hand rested on the handle of his revolver. "Evening," the man said, forcing a thin smile. "We're hunting a thief. Small kid. Ran off with something that don't belong to him." "You seen him?" The brother met his gaze evenly. "Can't say that I have," he replied. The man studied him for a long moment, then looked past him into the house. She stepped forward slightly, her heart pounding. The man's eyes narrowed as they met hers, then flicked toward the table. The boy had disappeared. The man frowned. "You sure about that?" he asked, his tone sharper now. The brother didn't flinch. "I said I haven't seen him." The man lingered a moment longer before finally turning toward his horse. "If you do," he said over his shoulder, "you'd best tell us. We don't take kindly to liars." The riders turned back toward the open land, their voices fading into the distance. The silence that followed felt like it might crush them. When the brother closed the door, she let out a shaky breath. "He's gone," she whispered. "The boy, where did he go?" He turned toward the window, scanning the darkening field. Somewhere out there. The wind carried a faint sounds, small footsteps running toward the trees. He lowered his rifle slowly. "He ran," he said, but deep down, they both knew it wasn't over. The riders would come back, and when they did, they wouldn't just be asking questions. The last of the daylight slipped away as the brother and sister stood in silence, the fear settling heavy in the room. Somewhere beyond the barn, a single cry echoed through the night. Carried by the wind like a warning, the night grew darker as the last glow of the sun disappeared behind the hills. The old farmhouse sat quiet except for the low whistle of the wind brushing through the broken window frames. She stood near the table where the boy had hidden moments ago, staring at the empty space as if he might reappear any second. Her brother paced by the window, his hand never leaving the rifle. Neither of them spoke for a while. The sound of the riders had faded into the distance. But the unease they brought still hung in the air. She finally broke the silence. "We can't just let him go out there alone," she said softly. Her brother stopped pacing. "He ran off, didn't he? That was his choice." "But he's just a child," she argued, her voice trembling. You saw the fear in his eyes. "He's running from something real. Those men weren't just bounty hunters or ranch hands. There was something cold about them." He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "I know what I saw, but we don't know what kind of trouble he's in. Maybe he did steal something. Maybe those men had a reason to chase him." She shook her head. "You don't believe that? You saw him? He's scared, hurt, starving." "No thief looks like that," he didn't answer. Instead, he looked out the window again, scanning the dark fields. The moon had risen, casting a pale light across the land. Every shadow looked alive. The wind picked up, rattling the shutters, carrying the faint cry of a coyote somewhere far off. It was the kind of night that made you feel like something was watching. Waiting inside, the warmth from the fire flickered weakly. She sat down, clutching her shawl. Her thoughts kept returning to the boy, the dirt on his face, the way he flinched every time someone moved too quickly. There was pain in him, more than any child should carry. Her brother poured himself a small drink from the jug on the counter. "You know," he said quietly, "Pa used to say this land remembers everything. Every sin, every lie, every soul that gets lost out here. Maybe that boy's part of something we don't want to dig into." She looked up at him, her eyes soft but firm. "Or maybe he's part of something we're meant to help fix." He didn't argue, but he didn't agree either. He just stared into his glass, lost in thought. Outside, the wind shifted again, and for a brief moment, she thought she saw movement near the fence. She stood, her breath catching. "He's out there," she whispered. Her brother moved fast, grabbing his rifle and opening the door. The cold night air rushed in, carrying the smell of dry grass and dust. The moonlight revealed the fields stretching far and empty till they saw it. A small figure crouched near the fence line, trying to stay low. "It's him," she said, already stepping off the porch. Her brother followed, his steps cautious. The boy didn't notice them at first. He was trying to pry open a section of the fence, as if planning to crawl through. When she called out his name, though she didn't even know it, yet he froze. "It's all right," she said gently. "You don't have to run." The boy turned slowly, his face pale in the moonlight. He looked terrified, his eyes wide and glistening. "They'll come back," he said. "If they find me here, they'll hurt you too." Her brother lowered the gun and took a step forward. "What did you do to make them come after you?" The boy hesitated. "I didn't do anything wrong. I swear." She came closer and knelt beside him. "Then tell us what happened." For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, in a low voice, he began to speak. "I was working for them," he said. "On the big ranch near the river. They took me from town after my ma died. Said they'd give me food and a bed. But it wasn't like that. They made me work from sunup to sundown. If I didn't move fast enough, they hit me. When I tried to leave, they locked me in the barn." Her brother's eyes hardened. "You're saying those men were ranchers?" The boy nodded. "They're not the kind that follow laws. They've got men everywhere, all armed. They take what they want, and nobody stops them." She reached for his hand, seeing how cold it was. "How did you get away?" "There was a fire," the boy whispered. "One of the men dropped a lantern. I ran when they were busy putting it out. I didn't take anything, I swear. But they said I stole silver from the main house. They said they'd shoot me if I was found." Her brother exhaled sharply, lowering his rifle completely. "That explains why they're hunting you. They don't care if it's true. They just need someone to blame." The boy's voice trembled. "I didn't mean to bring trouble here." "You didn't," she said softly. "You brought the truth. Nobody ever said that before." She smiled faintly, brushing the dirt from his cheek. But her brother didn't look convinced. "Safe is a word we shouldn't use so quick," he said, glancing toward the hills. "If those riders are still out there, they'll search every house between here and the river by morning. They don't leave loose ends. We can hide him," she said firmly. At least until we figure out what to do? The brother studied her for a moment, then nodded reluctantly. All right, the cellar should be safe for now. They led the boy back to the house, keeping to the shadows. Inside, the warmth of the fire made him shiver harder, as if his body was remembering what cold really felt like. She gave him a blanket and a small bowl of stew, which he devoured like he hadn't eaten in days. Watching him. It's not much, he said, but no one will find you down there. The boy hesitated before going in. Why are you helping me? She answered before her brother could. Because someone once helped us when no one else would. That seemed to be enough for him. He climbed down slowly, holding the blanket tight. When the door shut behind him, the house fell quiet again. For the next hour, they sat near the fire without speaking. The air was heavy with questions neither of them wanted to ask. Finally, her brother broke the silence. If those men come back, we can't lie again. Not twice. They'll know. So what are you saying? That we hand him over? I'm saying we need to be ready, he said. We don't know what we're up against. She turned away, staring into the flames. I won't let them take him, she whispered. He didn't argue. Instead, he reached over and stirred the fire, watching the sparks rise and fade. Then we better be smart about it. Outside, the wind carried a faint sound, the distant echo of hooves. Her brother stiffened. They're back, he said. She rushed to the window, her heart pounding. Far down the dirt road, she saw lights moving lanterns swinging from horseback. The same men, coming fast. He grabbed his rifle again. Get the boy, he said. We're moving. She opened the cellar door and called softly. The boy climbed out, eyes wide with fear. They found us, she said. We have to go. He nodded without a word. Her brother handed her a small satchel. Head toward the creek. There's an old cabin past the ridge. I'll hold them off long enough for you to get there. She shook her head. You're not staying here alone. He gave her a look that told her he'd already made up his mind. Someone has to slow them down. Before she could protest, the sound of galloping grew louder. The horses were close now, the men shouting to one another. Her brother pushed them toward the back door. Go. Now. She grabbed the boy's hand, pulling him into the night. The moon lit their path as they ran through the tall grass, the cold wind burning against their faces. Behind them, she heard the door of the farmhouse slam open, followed by shouting and the sharp crack of gunfire. She didn't look back. The boy stumbled once, and she pulled him up again, whispering, "Keep running." When they reached the creek, they stopped for breath. The sound of horses echoed somewhere behind them, but it was hard to tell how close. The boy's face was pale, his chest heaving. Is he going to be all right? He asked, his voice breaking. She looked back toward the dark horizon, where faint flashes of light flickered in the distance. He has to be, she said quietly. The wind grew colder. The land around them seemed to stretch endlessly in every direction. The creek water shimmered faintly in the moonlight. She turned to the boy and took his hand again. We keep moving, she said. Until the morning? He nodded, his small fingers gripping hers tight, as they walked deeper into the wild. The sound of the riders faded once more, but the fear did not. The prairie was wide, the night unforgiving. And somewhere behind them, her brother was still fighting to buy them time. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but she knew one thing for certain. The boy's story was far from over, and the truth about those men was still waiting in the dark. Just beyond the hills, the moon hung low in the sky, casting a pale glow over the prairie as she and the boy made their way along the narrow path beside the creek. The air was cold, sharp enough to sting their lungs, and every sound seemed louder in the silence. The boy stumbled often, his small body exhausted, but she kept him moving, whispering that they were almost there. Somewhere behind them, the faint echo of horses still carried through the wind. A cruel reminder that they weren't free yet. The old cabin came into view just before dawn. It stood crooked against the trees, half hidden by overgrown brush. Its roof sagging and walls cracked from years of weather. She remembered her father mentioning it once, a place trappers used long ago when this land was wilder. It looked like it hadn't seen life in years, but tonight it would have to do. She pushed open the door, and the hinges groaned in protest. The smell of dust and old wood filled the air. Inside, there was a small table, a broken chair, and the remains of a stone fireplace. She guided the boy inside, helping him sit against the wall. His eyes were heavy, his hands trembling. "Rest now," she said softly. "We'll figure things out when the sun comes up." He nodded weakly, wrapping himself in the old blanket she'd carried. Within minutes, he drifted into a restless sleep. She sat near the window, watching the faint light creep across the land, her thoughts tangled with worry. Her brother's face kept flashing through her mind, how he'd looked back at her before she ran. How sure he was about staying behind. She didn't know if he was alive or if those men had found him. As the sky brightened, she noticed smoke in the far distance, a thin column rising where the farmhouse stood. Her breath caught. She wanted to believe it was just the morning light playing tricks. But deep down she knew better. The boy stirred beside her, his voice soft. "Was that your home?" She turned away from the window. "Yes." He looked down, guilt written across his face. "They came because of me." She shook her head. "They came because they think they can do whatever they please." "You're not the reason they burn things." He didn't answer, but his eyes said enough. He carried the kind of guilt that didn't leave easy. By midday, they had made a small fire in the old hearth. She managed to find a tin pot and boiled water from the creek, stirring in bits of dried food she'd packed from the farmhouse. The boy ate slowly, his eyes darting toward the door every few minutes. "They'll look for you," he said quietly. "They always do." She met his gaze. "They'll look for both of us now." The boy hesitated. "You shouldn't have stayed with me. They won't stop until they find me." "You think I'd just leave you out there?" she said, her voice steady. "That's not who I am." He looked at her with something close to disbelief, like he wasn't used to kindness. "You don't even know my name," he whispered. "Then tell me." Hesitated, then said, "They used to call me Caleb." "Caleb," she repeated, testing the sound of it. "Well, Caleb, you're safe for now. That's all that matters." He gave a small nod, though his eyes stayed clouded with fear. Later that afternoon, she stepped outside to gather more wood. The forest was still, too still, the kind of quiet that made your skin prickle. She bent to pick up a fallen branch, and that's when she saw hoofprints in the dirt, fresh and deep. Her chest tightened. The men had come this way. She hurried back inside, her voice low but urgent. "We need to move again." Caleb looked up, startled. "Why? What's wrong?" "They're close," she said, glancing out the window. "Too close." Stood quickly, clutching the blanket. "I can go by myself," he said. "They're after me, not you." She grabbed his shoulder before he could move. "You're not going anywhere alone. We stick together." Before he could argue, the sound of horses broke through the still air. They froze. The rhythm of hooves was unmistakable fast, closing in from the north. She pushed Caleb toward the back door. "Go." They ran into the trees just as voices echoed from the clearing near the cabin. She pulled him down behind a fallen log, both of them holding their breath. "Spread out." One man shouted, "Check the cabin." Through the branches, she saw 3 riders dismount. Their clothes were dusty, their faces hard, their rifles ready. One of them kicked open the cabin door, while another scanned the trees. "They were here," the tallest man said. "Fire's still warm. Then they can't be far," another replied. "Split up." Sound of boots hitting the ground followed, then silence. She felt Caleb trembling beside her. "Stay down," she whispered. They lay there for what felt like hours, the forest thick with tension. Every twig that snapped made her flinch. She could hear one of the men whistling softly, the sound drifting closer. Then, just as suddenly, it stopped. A bird took flight nearby, and she risked a glance over the log. The man had turned away, heading east. When the last of the hoofbeats faded, she exhaled shakily. "We can't stay here," she said. "They'll circle back." Caleb nodded, his face pale. "Where do we go?" She thought for a moment. "There's an old town about a day's walk from here, Silver Creek. My brother used to trade there. If he's still alive, he might head that way." They set off again, keeping to the shadows of the trees. The land grew rougher as they went. the path twisting through dry gullies and thick brush. The sky turned gray by evening, and thunder rumbled somewhere in the distance as they walked. Caleb began to talk, hesitant at first, then slowly opening up. He told her more about the ranch, how it wasn't just a place for cattle but something darker. The men who ran it used the land for smuggling horses, goods, sometimes worse. They paid off local sheriffs to stay quiet. Anyone who talked disappeared. That's why they want me dead, he said. I saw something I shouldn't have. She looked at him sharply. What did you see? He hesitated. One night they brought a wagon to the barn. I thought it was hay, but when I got closer, I saw boxes, crates full of weapons. They said they were sending them south to sell. I think that's what the fire was about. They were hiding evidence. She stopped walking, the wind tugging at her hair. So those men aren't just after you because of some silver, they're protecting something bigger. Caleb nodded. If people found out what they were doing, they'd lose everything. This wasn't just a boy on the run, it was a secret that could burn half the county. By the time the storm hit, they had found shelter beneath a rocky ledge. Rain fell in heavy sheets, drenching the earth and washing away their tracks. Thunder rolled across the hills, echoing like cannon fire. She wrapped the blanket around Caleb and held him close as the cold wind howled through the trees. He looked up at her. Do you think your brother's still alive? She stared into the darkness, her throat tight. I have to believe he is. When the storm finally passed, the world felt washed clean, though danger still lurked beyond the horizon. They set out again at dawn, the wet earth soft beneath their boots. Around midday, they reached the edge of an open plain. Far in the distance, smoke rose from another camp. She motioned for Caleb to stay low. They crawled closer, hiding behind a ridge. Below them, a group of men were gathered around a fire. She recognized one of them, the tall man from the cabin. They were talking in low voices. It's too far to hear clearly, but she could make out a few words carried by the wind. Search, South Trail. Reward, her stomach turned. They were offering money for whoever brought the boy in. She looked at Caleb. They've spread word. If we go into town, people might turn us in. He stared at the campfire, his face pale. Then where do we go? She didn't have an answer. Every direction felt dangerous. But she knew one thing, they couldn't keep running forever. They needed proof, something that could turn the hunt around. We have to go back, she said suddenly. Caleb's eyes widened. Back where? To the ranch, she said. If what you said about the crates is true, there might be something there we can use something to expose them. He shook his head in disbelief. That's suicide. They'll be waiting. I know, she said quietly. But running won't save us anymore. The wind blew across the ridge, carrying the scent of smoke and dust. In the distance, a hawk circled above the wide, empty land. She felt the weight of what lay ahead pressing down on her. But she also felt something else dash resolve. The boy looked at her, uncertain but trusting. If we do this, he said, we'll need a plan. Shh. She nodded. Then we start thinking. They turned away from the ridge and disappeared back into the trees, their figures swallowed by the shadows of the dying day. The sound of thunder rumbled again, far off, but this time, it wasn't the weather, it was the echo of the conflict waiting to come. The night was colder than before, the kind that crept into your bones and made every breath sting. The air smelled of rain and gunpowder from distant storms. She and Caleb had spent the day moving through the thick woods, staying off the main trails, avoiding every sign of smoke or hoofprint. The plan was dangerous and nearly impossible. They were going back to the ranch. But as much as she feared it, she knew it was the only way to end what had started. Caleb walked beside her, his small face set with quiet determination. He had changed over the past few days. The fear was still there, but something else had grown behind his eyes, its kind of steady courage. The kind that comes when there's no choice left but to keep going. They stopped near the edge of a ridge, overlooking the wide plain below. The ranch was visible in the distance, lit by the faint glow of lanterns. The main house stood tall and proud, surrounded by barns and corrals. Even from this far, she could see the figures of men moving about, rifles slung over their shoulders. "They've doubled their watch," she said quietly. Caleb nodded. "They think I'll come back." "And they're right," she said. He looked at her with worry. "You don't have to do this." "They'll kill you if they catch you." She met his eyes. "They'll kill both of us if we don't stop them. You said there were crates in the barn proof of what they're hiding. If we can find even one of those, we can show people what they're doing." Caleb hesitated, then whispered, "There's another way in. A tunnel under the north fence. They used it to move things at night. That's how I escaped." She nodded. "Then that's how we'll get in." They waited until the moon sank low, then made their way down the ridge. The wind was strong, carrying the smell of smoke and horses. Every step felt louder than it should have. Caleb led her through the brush to the edge of the fence, where a narrow trench was hidden beneath a tangle of weeds. "This way," he whispered. They crawled through the damp earth, moving slowly until they emerged on the other side. The ranch loomed before them, silent but alive with danger. Lanterns flickered from the porch, and somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. They crept along the shadows of the barn, keeping low. When she peeked through a crack in the wood, she saw the inside faintly lit. 2 men were talking near the stalls. She recognized one of them, the tall man from before, the one who had come to their door. His voice carried clearly through the quiet. "They found the farmhouse burned down," he said. "But no bodies." "Means someone's still out there?" His companion spat on the ground. "That woman and the boy." "You think they'll be dumb enough to come back?" The tall man laughed coldly. "Fear makes folks do strange things. If that boy's seen what I think he's seen, he'll try to talk, and she'll help him. Either way, they'll come to us before this is over." She felt Caleb stiffen beside her, his small hand gripping hers tight. She squeezed it back, signaling him to stay calm. When the men finally left the barn, she waited until the sound of their boots faded, then pushed the door open quietly. The smell of hay and oil filled the air. The barn was lined with crates and barrels, stacked high against the walls. She moved closer, brushing the dust from one of the boxes. Stamped across the top were faded letters, "Property of the Union Supply, CO." She frowned. "These don't belong here," she said softly. Caleb nodded. "That's what I saw. They were loading these at night. Some had rifles inside. Others had bags of money." She pried open the crate with a loose nail. Inside, rows of rifles gleamed faintly in the lantern light. Her stomach turned. This was worse than she imagined. Whoever these men were, they weren't just ranchers, they were smugglers. Moving weapons through the frontier, under false names. Caleb's voice shook. "We have to take one of the crates, or something with the mark on it." She scanned the barn quickly. In the corner, she spotted a small ledger sitting on a workbench. "That's better," she whispered. "If they're keeping records, it'll be there." She grabbed the book and flipped through the pages. It was filled with lists of names, dates, and coded notes about shipments. It was proof solid, undeniable proof. Just as she closed it, the sound of voices came from outside. "Check the barn again," someone shouted. I saw movement. Her pulse quickened. "Hide," she hissed. They ducked behind a pile of hay just as the barn door creaked open. 2 men stepped inside, their lanterns sweeping across the floor. The light passed dangerously close to where they crouched. "You sure you saw something?" One man said. "Could have been a coyote," the other muttered. But the boss said no chances. Their footsteps came closer. The first man kicked at the haystack, and dust filled the air. She held her breath, gripping the ledger tightly against her chest. Then a noise came from outside, a hoarse snorting, and the sound of another man calling. "Hey, they found tracks near the north fence." The 2 men turned instantly. "Let's go." When the door slammed behind them, she let out the breath she'd been holding. Caleb's face was pale. "They're following our trail," he said. "Then we move now," she replied. They slipped out the back of the barn, keeping to the dark side of the yard. Shouts echoed across the property as men spread out with lanterns. The glow of the lights made the open field look like fireflies in motion. She clutched the ledger to her chest. "We just need to reach the woods," she said. But before they could move, a voice rang out from the shadows. "Don't take another step." They froze. The tall man stood a few yards away, rifle raised, his face lit faintly by the lantern hanging from his hand. "I knew you'd come back," he said. "You should have kept running." Caleb took a step back, his small hands shaking. "You lied about me," he said. "You said I stole." The man laughed, cold and hollow. "You did worse than steal, boy. You saw things you weren't meant to, and now you think you can expose us?" She moved in front of Caleb, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "You can't kill every witness. People will start asking questions." He smirked. "Out here, nobody asks questions. They just find what the coyotes leave behind." She gripped Caleb's arm. "Run," she whispered. But before he could move, the man cocked his rifle. "Try it," he said, "and I'll put him down before you reach the fence." The air felt heavy, every second stretching into eternity. The sound of other men shouting grew closer. They were closing in from all sides. She knew they couldn't fight their way out. Her mind raced. She glanced toward the barn door, where the lantern the man had dropped still burned. Then an idea flashed through her mind, wild but desperate. Caleb looked up at her, his voice barely a whisper. "What do we do?" She didn't answer. Instead, she shifted slightly, her foot nudging the lantern's handle. The man noticed and lifted his rifle higher. "Don't even think about it," he warned. But she moved fast, kicking the lantern toward the hay. It toppled over, spilling flame across the dry straw. The fire caught instantly, racing up the wooden walls. The man cursed and stumbled back, lowering his rifle as smoke filled the air. "Run!" she shouted. Caleb darted toward the fence, and she followed, clutching the ledger. Behind them, fire spread quickly, lighting the night with a fierce orange glow. The ranch erupted into chaos, men shouting, horses screaming. The smell of burning wood thickened the air. They reached the edge of the property, but gunfire cracked behind them. Bullets tore through the dirt nearby. She grabbed Caleb's hand and pulled him into the tall grass. Diving for cover, the tall man's voice carried through the smoke. "Find them. Don't let them get away." They crawled through the darkness, hearts pounding, lungs burning. The fire's light flickered behind them like a beacon. Caleb stumbled, clutching his leg where a splinter of wood had cut him. She helped him up, her own legs trembling. When they finally reached the creek, they collapsed behind a fallen tree. The sound of gunfire faded, replaced by the distant roar of the burning ranch. Caleb looked up at her, his voice shaking. "Did we get it?" She opened the ledger, the pages still safe. "We did." He stared at the flames rising into the night. "They'll come after us." "I know," she said, "but now we've got something they can't bury." The firelight flickered across their faces, and for a moment the sky above them glowed red. Somewhere out in the dark, the sound of horses echoed again closer. This time, relentless. She tightened her grip on the ledger, feeling the weight of everything that had happened. The night wasn't over. The fight wasn't over. But the truth at last was burning its way into the open. The creek water glistened with the reflection of the flames as they moved deeper into the woods, their silhouettes swallowed by the rising smoke. With danger following close behind, the forest was still burning behind them when they reached the far side of the creek. The night air was thick with smoke, the smell of charred wood clinging to their clothes. The fire's glow dimmed with every step, but its roar carried through the valley like a warning. She and Caleb kept moving, their legs heavy, lungs aching, until the only sound left was the soft rush of water and the whisper of wind through the trees. They stopped beside a cluster of rocks near the riverbank. She sank down, trying to steady her breath. Caleb crouched beside her, clutching his leg where the splintered wood had cut deep. She tore a strip from her sleeve and wrapped it tightly around the wound. He winced, but didn't complain. "You did good," she said softly. Caleb looked up, his face pale but determined. "Is it over?" She hesitated before answering. "Not yet. But we're close." The ledger lay between them, its edges singed from the fire. Inside those pages was proof records of every shipment, Every false name, every stolen weapon. The men at the ranch had built their empire on lies, and now those lies had something stronger than their guns to stand against them. The sky was beginning to lighten when they found an old trail leading north. It was narrow and overgrown, but it moved toward the small town of Mill Creek, where she hoped they could find someone willing to listen. She had little faith in men with badges, not after all she'd seen. But she knew there were still honest folks who wanted justice. By noon they reached the outskirts of town. The main street was quiet, dust swirling between the wooden buildings. A few horses stood tied to posts, their reins swaying lazily in the wind. She led Caleb toward the sheriff's office, her hands trembling slightly as she pushed open the door. Inside, a man sat behind a desk cluttered with papers. His hat rested on a peg beside the door, and his tired eyes lifted as they entered. "You look like you've been through a storm," he said. "You could say that," she replied, laying the ledger on the desk. "We've come from the Dawson Ranch. I need you to see this." The sheriff's brow furrowed. Dawson Ranch. I've heard the name. Big cattle outfit south of here. She nodded. That's what they want people to think. But they're smuggling guns and money across the border. This book has all their records. Names, shipments, even the routes they use. He opened the ledger and began to read, his expression darkening with every line. When he looked up, his voice was low but steady. "If this is real, it's going to bring down more than just a few ranchers. These names. They're government men, traders, even officers." Caleb shifted uneasily beside her. "They burned everything. We barely made it out." Sheriff closed the book and leaned back. "You're lucky to be alive." He studied them for a long moment. "I'll need to send a telegram to the marshal in Fort Sterling. He'll want this evidence himself." She nodded, though a cold dread lingered in her stomach. She knew too well how power worked out here, how quickly the truth could disappear if it landed in the wrong hands. "Will you help us?" she asked quietly. The sheriff looked at her for a long time before answering. "If what you say is true, I'll do everything I can. But you should rest for now. There's a room at the boarding house across the street. I'll come for you once I've sent word." They left the office and crossed to the small inn, where an elderly woman gave them a room without question. The bed was soft, the first comfort they'd known in days. Caleb fell asleep almost instantly, his small body finally giving in to exhaustion. She sat by the window, watching the quiet town. A man sweeping dust from his porch, a horseman riding in from the ridge. It felt strange, almost unreal, to sit in peace after everything. That evening, a knock came at the door. She opened it to find the sheriff, his face lined with concern. He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. "You were right," he said. "The marshal confirmed the names. There's a full investigation coming, and they'll be here by morning. But you need to leave town before then." Her eyes widened. "Leave? Why?" "Because someone else got word first," he said. "Two riders came through an hour ago asking questions about a woman and a boy. I told them nothing, but they'll find you soon enough." Caleb stirred awake, hearing the words. "They found us again." The sheriff nodded grimly. "They won't stop until they've buried every piece of evidence, including you." She felt her heart sink, but she kept her voice calm. "Then where do we go?" "There's an old outpost near the river fork, 5 miles north," he said. "It's abandoned now, but you can stay there till morning. Once the marshal's men arrive, I'll send word. After that, you'll be under their protection." She thanked him, gathered their things, and took Caleb by the hand. The sheriff led them to the edge of town, where the forest began again. "Follow the river," he said quietly. "Keep your lanterns low, and don't stop until you see the old bridge." The ride through the night was silent, except for the sound of the water beside them. The moon was high, turning the surface of the river silver. Caleb leaned against her, half asleep, his trust in her unshaken even as danger closed in again. They reached the outpost, before dawn a crumbling cabin near the water's edge. She lit a small fire and sat by the doorway, watching the horizon. For the first time in days, she allowed herself to breathe. The air smelled of pine and cold water, and the stars stretched endlessly overhead. Caleb stirred beside her. "Do you think the marshal will stop them?" he asked. She looked into the distance, where faint streaks of light marked the coming dawn. Maybe not all of them, but enough to make a difference. He was quiet for a while before speaking again. I didn't mean for any of this to happen, she smiled faintly. None of us did. But sometimes the truth has a way of finding people who can't ignore it. The sun began to rise, soft gold spilling over the hills. She felt warmth return to her hands, the chill of fear slowly fading. The fire crackled softly, and for a long time they said nothing. By mid-morning, distant riders appeared on the trail. She stood, tense at first, until she saw the glint of badges catching the light. The marshal's men. Relief washed over her as they approached. The sheriff rode among them, the ledger safely tucked in his saddlebag. It's over, he said, when he reached her. They caught 2 men trying to flee south. The others are being hunted. The ranch won't rise again. Caleb looked up at her, eyes wide. So we're free? She nodded slowly, a small smile breaking through the exhaustion. Yes, Caleb, we're free. The marshal offered them protection and safe passage to a nearby settlement. The sheriff promised the ledger would be used to bring justice to everyone involved. She watched them ride away with the evidence, knowing that the truth at last was in the open. That night, as they camped near the river, the sky was clear and filled with stars. The world felt different, quieter, somehow more forgiving. Caleb lay beside her, asleep again, his face peaceful for the first time since the chaos began. She looked at him and felt a deep sense of gratitude. They had lost their home, their safety, and nearly their lives, but they had found something stronger: hope. The kind of hope that grows from surviving what should have broken you. The wind rustled through the trees. Carrying the scent of fresh earth and pine, she watched the water flow by, carrying the ashes of the past towards someplace distant. For the first time, she didn't look back. Somewhere behind them, the smoke from the Dawson Ranch had long since faded. The men who once ruled through fear were gone, and the truth had finally caught up to them. She closed her eyes, listening to the sound of the river. It was steady and endless, like life itself, always moving forward, never stopping for what's lost. And as the night deepened around them, she whispered softly, "It's done," letting the words drift away with the current. Carried far into the wild land they had fought to survive, top of form, bottom of form.